Husband disappearance. Jane walked into the house Sunday night after the weekend. "Honey, I'm home." There was no reply. She checked the bedroom and bathroom, the backyard, and the study. No one. Only the living room light was on. The rest of the house was plunged into darkness. Back in the garage, she made sure Dave's car was still there. That's odd, she thought. Shrugging, she went to make herself something to eat. When Dave was still gone by 10 p.m., she called his cell phone. There was no response. Just like Saturday night and this morning, she thought. At midnight, she called the police. They told her they couldn't do anything unless the man disappeared for a whole night. Despite her fatigue, she found it hard to sleep. This was all very unlike Dave. She decided not to go to work the next day, but she killed time until 8 in the morning and called the police again. The operator on duty put her through. She told him that she had gotten home last night but hadn't been able to contact her husband since Friday. They promised to send someone within 2 hours. Jane called Dave's cell phone several more times. Around 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and Jane let 2 uniformed police officers in. She told them everything she thought was relevant. "Madam, there are some common signs that we find out in missing persons cases that give us an idea of whether a person could not have disappeared of their own free will or whether it is a crime." They then asked where Dave kept his car, wallet, phone, keys, and passport. Jane pointed to Dave's keys hanging on a hook and led them into the garage to show them his car. They gave it a quick look around but found nothing of interest. Jane then opened the safe to show them Dave's passport, then opened his bedside table. At this point, she started to get really worried. Her husband's wallet lay there. Where could he go where he wouldn't need it? The only thing missing was a cell phone. Before she could worry even more, one of the policemen started asking quick questions. The other stood quite far away, just observing. "Could you tell us about your husband, Mrs. Brown? Where does he work?" "We have our own business, Havelock Industries, you know." The policeman nodded. "Dave's the CEO, and I help out in the office, do general administrative duties, help with books and things like that." "Wow, you must be loaded with money." Yeah, we can afford the finer things in life." "And you say this is completely abnormal behavior for your husband. Has he ever disappeared before?" "No, never. My Dave is a man of habit. You could check the clock on his routine on most days." "How would you describe your marriage, Mrs. Brown?" "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, was your husband happy? Could he run off with his secretary or anything like that?" Jane gave a short laugh. "Well, for starters, I'm the one who is his secretary. Secondly, Dave would never do anything like that. I'm his life. He's totally devoted to me." "All right, Mrs. Brown. Now, can I ask where you were last weekend?" Went to visit my sister in Colville, left Friday night and got home Sunday just after 7 p.m. "You were driving?" "Yes, it's only 3 hours away." "All right, Mrs. Brown. That's all I can ask at the moment. Can you give us your husband's cell phone number, all his bank account numbers, personal and business, and all the credit card numbers he uses? Also, please, a list of his friends, his and your family members with their contact information." "Why do you need all the bank account numbers and credit card numbers?" "Well, we know he left his wallet behind, so if he's anywhere, he needs money to live on." "You said there were signs indicating whether he left of his own free will or if something bad happened. What did it look like?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brown, but other than the missing phone, nothing else looks particularly good." It took Jane about 15 minutes to give out all the information requested. Then she walked them to the door. "We'll keep you posted. Of course, if he shows up, you'll let us know, won't you?" "Of course I will." The 2 policemen left. As soon as they got into the car, the older one turned to his partner. "Well, it stinks." "What do you mean?" "Didn't you notice how defensive she got when you asked about the state of their marriage? Then she stammered when you asked where she was this weekend. I'm telling you, John, I think we need to speed up the process. Something's rotten in the Danish kingdom. Is her sister's phone number on that list she gave us? I think it'd be a damn good idea to start with her." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 2 days later, Dave was still gone. Jane was starting to freak out with worry. She called the police at least twice a day, but there was no news. On Wednesday morning, the same two police officers that had shown up at the office on Monday showed up and asked to speak to her. She took them into Dave's office for some privacy. This time it was the senior officer who spoke. Mrs. Brown, on Monday you told us that you spent the entire weekend with your sister in Colville. Is that correct? Yes. Would you like to tell us why you lied, Mrs. Brown? It struck Jane. It was pure reflex that she had stuck to her sister's story last time. She wasn't the sort of person who was comfortable lying. Well, that had been the case before, a year ago. Now, it had become almost second nature. Yeah, I didn't want Dave to find out. Find out what, Mrs. Brown? That I wasn't at my sister's. Where were you, Mrs. Brown? At the Hilton across town. Were you alone? No. Who was with you? I don't want to say. Well, that's your choice, Mrs. Brown. Either you tell us now or we arrest you, take you down to the station, and you tell us. What? Arrest me? Why? Well, look at it from our point of view, Mrs. Brown. Your husband has disappeared and all the signs point to a crime. There's something else we won't go into right now, but believe me, we have enough to hold you. So your choice. Who were you with at the Hilton all weekend? A man. The policeman asking the question smiled triumphantly at his partner. Jane missed the exchange of remarks. She was too busy looking at the floor, her face flushed. With whom, exactly, Mrs. Brown? Dennis Smith. Is that your lover, Mrs. Brown? Yes. And did you leave the hotel at any time between Friday and Sunday? No. The only time I left the room was to go to the restaurant to eat. Can you say the same thing about Mr. Smith? No. He was gone for about 2 hours Saturday afternoon. Said he had some personal business to attend to. Where can we find this Dennis Smith? Jane hesitated for a moment before answering. The situation was getting out of hand. Through the lobby! He's my husband's deputy! A look of disgust appeared on the policeman's face. Is it possible, Mrs. Brown, that your husband found out about your adultery and left you? No. We were carefully encrypted. There's no way my husband could have found out. Would you ask Mr. Smith to come in here, madam, and then leave us alone? Without a word, Jane stood up and entered Dennis's office. Dennis, the police are here. They know about us. They want to talk to you. Oh, shit. Dennis's face went pale. Then he slowly stood up and walked into Dave's office with the look of a man on his way to the gallows. Jane sat in the waiting room for the next 45 minutes, her mind reeling with terror. For the first time, she truly thought about her affair with Dennis. Up until now, she had emotionally detached from it, trying not to think about it. The instigator was boredom. Loving the same man for so many years had become just a chore. Dave had stopped asking her for anything new and exciting years ago, so it just became uninteresting. When Dennis had expressed his desire for a special relationship, Jane had hardly hesitated. It added an excitement that she lacked. All in all, there was very little guilt on her part, except for that one time. It had been about 4 months since her cheating when Dennis had suggested something else she'd never tried before. She remembered for a moment how her husband had offered her the same thing years ago, in almost the exact same words. Of course, she had turned him down. It was a little too slutty for her taste. She had a vague thought that perhaps she herself was to blame for the humdrum nature of lovemaking with Dave. That thought was brushed aside by the excitement of the new experience, and was subsequently buried deeply. Just one more thing to enhance her unseemly experience by hiding. Her hiding weekend did not end well. On Friday night, Dennis suggested they both file for divorce and get married. Jane immediately shot him down. She wasn't going to leave Dave. On Saturday, Dennis pressed the same button again until the situation escalated to the breaking point. In the heat of the moment, something was said that made Jane suspect that Dennis was out to get her half of the company. Instinctively, Jane knew not to tell the police the real reason Dennis had disappeared for 2 hours on a Saturday night. He had popped out of the room. Yes, he came back. And yes, they made love. But Jane realized the affair was doomed and began the process of emotionally divorcing her lover. She knew it had to be done carefully to avoid any sudden changes that might alert her husband. After the police officers left, she and Dennis talked for the rest of the day, discussing all the possible outcomes. At 6 in the evening, they parted with heavy hearts. Jane to her suddenly empty house, Dennis to his wife. Sleep would not come to either of them. The next day at 7 in the morning, Jane was awakened by a loud knock on the door. She opened it and was greeted by a man in a suit holding a badge in front of his face. Behind him stood 2 uniformed police officers and 2 men in disposable coveralls. "Mrs. Brown, I'm Detective Danny Bourgeois. We have a warrant to search these premises. We also have a warrant to search your office. We'd appreciate it if you could provide us with your and your husband's computer log-in information, if you have it." "Why, am I a suspect?" "No, we're just looking for clues as to where your husband might be, Mrs. Brown." Stunned, Jane complied with their request, writing the requested passwords on a piece of paper. At his request, she handed him the keys to the office. While the small army invading her home was busy, she called Dennis on his cell phone. There was no answer, so she called the landline. Dennis's wife, Andrea, answered. Despite being only 5'7", Andrea could pass for a model. She had short, boyish blonde hair cut short, hiding her round face. Alabaster skin surrounded light blue eyes and plump lips. Her size, 4 breasts, and flawless skin had always made Jane envious, especially since the whole package was combined with a truly honest and fiercely loyal personality. She had less chance of cheating on her husband than a Frenchman living next door to a brothel. Not for the first time, Jane wondered why the hell Dennis chose her over his wife. "Jane, do you know why my carpets are being trampled by 6 policemen?" "No, Andrea. I have the same thing here. It must have something to do with Dave's disappearance." "What? Dave disappeared?" Dennis didn't say anything. "What does this have to do with us?" "I don't know, Andrea." "Can I talk to Dennis, please?" "Aaron, he's busy with the police right now. Look, Jane, what's going on?" "I have no idea, Andrea. I'm sorry, but I gotta go. Bye." As she returned the phone to its base in the kitchen, Jane saw one of the technicians kneeling on the floor with a strange-looking flashlight. She walked out of the house. In the garage, another technician was sitting in Dave's car. She wanted to get in the car, but the technician stopped her. "We haven't checked her out yet, ma'am." With no way out, Jane sat in her office listening to relaxing music. The guys in blue left around 2 in the afternoon without saying a word about her car. Jane drove to the office in Dave's car. No one said you couldn't. The police left a small mess in the reception area and Dave and Dennis's office. Dennis was already there, and they exchanged words of comfort. Their recent feud was forgotten in their shared fear. Jane pushed him away when he tried to hug her, reminding him that they could never show anything in public. They managed to maintain an emotional and physical separation until the weekend. Then in desperation, scared and lonely, Jane called Dennis and they met at their usual hotel for a brief affair. She angrily pushed him away when he rubbed her ass, but allowed herself a friendly hug. The whole encounter turned out to be a disaster for Jane. Clearly tormented by guilt and fear, Dennis even cried. This opened Jane's eyes. She began to see the veil that had clouded her mind begin to lift. Was she really risking her happy marriage, her sweet, loving husband for this weakling? An hour later, the decision was clear. No way. And it was here that guilt and remorse truly overwhelmed her. She cried until she fell asleep on Saturday and Sunday evenings and hardly slept a wink. The insomnia was brought on by 2 things. First, she firmly believed that her husband had discovered her infidelity and had hurt himself. The second was guilt. Oh yes, she'd had it all along, but she'd done a brilliant job of burying it deeply. Now it manifested itself with redoubled vigor. So when she was awakened by Detective Bourgeois on Monday morning, she was almost incapable of thinking rationally. "Mrs. Brown, would you be willing to accompany me to the police station?" "Yes, of course." "I should tell you, Mrs. Brown, that you are entitled to legal representation." Jane had already thought of that. Deep down, she knew the police weren't finished with her yet. "No, it's okay, Detective. Am I going to get in your car, or can I use my own?" "Better in mine, ma'am." The short ride back to the station was silent. All the while, Jane wondered if there was any bad news. Had they found Dave? As they pulled up to the station, she saw Dennis being led into the building. Danny led her into an interview room where they were joined by a female detective who hadn't been introduced. Once they were settled in, the questions began. "I just want you to know that this conversation is being recorded. Can you please go on record as saying that you agree with that?" Yes, I agree with it. Can you also confirm that you did not seek legal advice? Yes, that's correct. For the record, Mrs. Brown, we have monitored your husband's bank accounts and credit cards over the last week, and there has been absolutely no activity since that Saturday morning when you were away. What about his cell phone? I'll get to that. Mrs. Brown, a week ago, two of my colleagues visited your home when you reported your husband, David Brown, missing. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. During that visit, they asked you where you had been last Saturday and Sunday. You said you were visiting your sister. Subsequent investigations proved this not to be true, and you later admitted that you had spent the weekend at a hotel with Mr. Dennis Smith. Tell me, why did you lie, Mrs. Brown? With her blatant lie thrown in her face, Jane felt very uncomfortable again. So she answered again after some pause. I didn't want my affair to become public. Danny turned to the lady sitting away from the table. They exchanged nods. Having successfully embarrassed her, Danny continued to question Jane. Mrs. Brown, do you know the passwords to all of your husband's accounts? Of course, that's my business too. And did Mr. Dennis Smith have access to the company accounts? Yes, of course, he's the chief financial officer. Okay. Are you aware that on the Friday before your trip, the sum of $8.3 million was transferred into Mr. Dennis Smith's personal account and then immediately transferred to an untraceable account in the Cayman Islands? That amount represented almost the entire working capital of your company. Can you explain your whereabouts on that Friday at 1:17 in the afternoon, Mrs. Brown? Jane suddenly felt herself sinking. At what hour had she disappeared with Dennis into one of the storage rooms in the backyard? It was getting worse and worse. She realized that the two detectives were still waiting for her answer. No, I couldn't. I was at work, though. If I get my diary, I can confirm that. Maybe later, Mrs. Brown. I should say we suspect your husband is dead. No, that cannot be. Look at the evidence, Mrs. Brown. Absolutely no activity on your husband's accounts. No public appearances. We know he hasn't left the country as his passport is still here. Jane tried to interrupt him by informing him that as Dave had dual citizenship, he had two passports. But Danny knew his business and didn't let her get a grip. He interrupted her again. Earlier you asked about your husband's cell phone, Mrs. Brown. I should tell you that with the assistance of your husband's service provider, it was found in a dumpster 1 block from your business on Tuesday of last week. A quantity of plastic sheeting was found with it. Both the phone and the tape showed traces of the same type of blood as your husband's. Do you have any comment, Mrs. Brown? Jane went white as a sheet. If something had happened to Dave, she'd be devastated. The detectives watched the look of horror on her face and completely misinterpreted it. No. Danny Bourgeois belonged to a new breed of detective, the product of a targeted recruiting policy, ruggedly handsome, with a natural ability to put people at ease, modestly intelligent, but with a bit of a checkered past. How can I tell? Let's just say he was already known to the police before he was recruited. His combination of intelligence, disarming demeanor, and shrewd criminal mind ensured his rapid rise through the ranks. With his instinctive approach, he knew the secret was to keep suspects off balance. He dashed forward. Then perhaps you can explain where the trace of the large blood stain found on your kitchen floor, also confirmed as your husband's blood type, came from? At this point, all Jane was capable of doing was stare at the floor and shake her head. After giving her a bit of a brew to further confuse her, Danny continued to press on. For the record, Jane Brown is shaking her head. Mrs. Brown, could you comment on the prenuptial agreement found in your safe, which clearly states that in the event of proven infidelity, all assets from the marriage between you and David Brown go to the offended party? For the record again, the suspect shakes her head. Are you aware, Mrs. Brown, that during a search of Mr. Dennis Smith's home, a fishing knife was found? Attempts were made to clean it, but it showed traces of human blood, again of the type found on your husband. Once again, for the record, the suspect shakes her head. And finally, Mrs. Brown, can you explain a certain amount of your husband's blood found in the trunk of your car? A car that you claim was parked at the Hilton Hotel from Friday evening to Sunday evening. That blood, according to forensics, was spilled sometime Saturday night, give or take 12 hours. At last, the gravity of the situation, and the deadly certainty of it, began to dawn upon her. A full 5 minutes passed before she answered. Both detectives seemed glad she was taking her time. I think I need a lawyer. Wow, Sherlock. Jane Brown. I'm arresting you for the murder of David Brown. You don't have to say anything, but anything you do say. That's when Jane collapsed. Jane was held overnight until 11 the next morning, when the judge set her bail at $250,000 and ordered her to surrender her passport. She was able to access a credit account to transfer the money to a business account. She caught a cab and drove home. That night, the absolute shell of a woman who just 8 days ago had been on top of the world was contemplating the future. A woman who once had everything. She had come to terms with the fact that her husband was dead. What she couldn't bear was the realization that she had caused it herself. Guilt and remorse almost stopped her heart. She tried to imagine Dave's face in happier times, but images of his last breath on the floor of her kitchen prevented it. The mental image of his face wrapped in plastic, staring at her as the trunk closed, was eating away at her soul, no longer protected by denial. She sat in the kitchen in a daze. The phone rang, and the battered shell automatically answered. It was Dennis. Jane, you have to help me. I called Andrea, and she said she dumped me and cleared our bank accounts. You have to help me out, please. Okay, Dennis. She got back on the line and transferred another $250,000 from the credit account. Using her new knowledge, she was able to pay the second mortgage. The next day, just before lunch, Dennis called again. Thank you, my love. Can I come over to your place? I really need to hug you right now. Okay, Dennis, I'll see you soon. As soon as she heard the cab stop outside, she got up and headed for the door. Jane Brown's shell opened the door. What tiny bit of her sanity that was still left shattered when she saw the ogre standing on the porch. You lying, murdering bastard! You killed my Dave! Picking up her husband's gun, she pulled the trigger. She didn't see the look of shock on his face as the monster was thrown back with a 0.45-inch hole in the center of his chest. He fell so fast that the second bullet flew over his head. The last 6, however, hit the twitching body lying on the walkway. With the gun still clutched in his suddenly collapsed fist, something fell on the top step, his back against the door jamb, and the spirit of Jane Brown vanished. Epilogue. Ruth arrived at her sister's house, mentally preparing herself for the grim task of putting Jane's affairs in order. Noticing the mail in the drawer, she picked it up. Mostly bills, but one postcard as well. Following the conventional logic. If people want to keep a postcard message private, they use an envelope. She picked it up. On the cover was a picture of a beautiful beach in Grand Cayman. On the back, it simply said, "Wish you and Dennis were here. Love, D&A." What did it all mean? She continued walking toward the house. The end!